Vishnu Vishnupad Paramahamsa. Parivra Jaka Jarga Ashto Tarasata Shri Srimad, His Divine Grace of High Charana Arvinda Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada Ki. ISKCON BBD Founder Acharya, save the whole world, Shri Prabhupada Ki. Jai Nitya Vishnu Vishnupad Paramahamsa. Parivra Jaka Jarga Ashto Tarasata Shri Srimad, His Divine Grace Shri Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur Maharaj Ki. Ananta Koti Vaishnavinda Ki. Nama Acharya Shri Haridas Thakur Ki. Prem Sakaho Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Sri Advaita Gadadhara Sivasadi Gaura Bhaktivinoda Ki. Sri Sri Radha Krishna Govardhana Shamakund Radha Kund Giri Govardhana Ki. Braj Bhumi Shivindavadama Ki. Navadip Mayapur Dama Ki. Purushtam Chatra Jagannathpuri Dama Ki. Ganga Mai Ki. Jamuna Mai Ki. Bhakti Devi Ki. Tulasi Maharani Ki. Samaveta Bhaktivinoda Ki. Jai Nitai Go Premanandi. All glorious devotees, all glorious devotees, all glorious devotees, all glorious lotus feet of Sri Gaura and Sri Gauranga, all glorious Sri Prabhupada Ki Jai. Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Tata Tasha Avipatasya Ata Tasha Vitaptasya Ata Tasha Vipataptasya Katidayatanani Ha Katidayatanani Ha Katidayatanani Ha Atatasha Vitapatasya Katidayatanani Ja Nira Abhidyanta Devanam Nirabhidyanta Devanam Nirabhidyanta Devanam Te Me Gadata Shinu Tani Me Gadata Shinu Tani Me Gadata Shinu Nirabhidyanta Devanam Tani Me Gadata Shinu Gata. Therefore Tasya his Avitaptasya in terms of his contemplation. Katita, how many? Ayatanani, embodiments. Ha, there were. Nirabhidyanta, by separated parts. Devanam, of the demigods. Tani, all those. Megadata, described by me. Shinu, just here. There's a really important word, this Shrinu, and we see this comes up a lot in various places, even the very first verse of the 7th chapter. Does anyone know that verse?
I know, yeah.
Tashrinu, yeah, very important. Prabhupada, Krishna says, just here, but how by practicing yoga and full consciousness you can overcome all doubts. And this is the class that Prabhupada gave, this is the verse that Prabhupada gave class on more than any other verse, the 7.1. He gave class on this 19 times. And there's one time he gave class, I think it was 74 or 75 in Melbourne. And Prabhupada really emphasized this word, this shinu, just here. And he makes the point how hearing is the essence of the devotional process, because you hear from a qualified person, you hear from the spiritual master, you hear from the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and you apply what you hear, and then you actually become liberated, you become qualified to escape from this material tabernacle. So, same point here is Maitreya Rishi is saying, just here, I'm going to describe to you how the Lord manifests this universe, and he's going to talk about all the different senses. So, a very, very important point. Translation. Maitreya said, "You may now hear from me how the Supreme Lord separated himself into the diverse forms of the demigods after the manifestation of the gigantic universal form." Responsively, please. Maitreya said, "You may now hear from me how the Supreme Lord separated himself into the diverse forms of the demigods after the manifestation of the gigantic universal form." Purport. The demigods are separated parts and parcels of the Supreme Lord, as are all other living entities. So Prabhupada's making this point here, that the demigods aren't different from anyone else, but then he's going to say how they are different. The only difference between the demigods and the ordinary living entities is that when the living entities are rich in pious acts of devotional service to the Lord, and when their desire to lord it over material energy has vanished, they are promoted to the post of demigods, who are entrusted by the Lord with executing the management of the universal affairs. So it's a really interesting point that Prabhupada is making here in the purport, how he's saying that the Devatas are the same as you and I. They are just other living entities. They have the same, capacities, etc. But the difference is that they're pious. Due to acts of devotional service, they become quite pious, and therefore, due to their piety, they develop the necessary disposition to take up a service role. And it's interesting here in this section, basically it runs from this verse through to verse 33. It's all describing how the different senses manifest, and from the senses of the universal form come the various senses for the living entity, and how the Devatas enter into those senses of the universal form, and they control those senses within the living entity. It talks about, how Surya and Varuna and Vayu and all these different personalities, they actually control the senses, just like Surya controls the sight, because without the sunlight, what do you see? Vayu, the sense of touch, skin. Varuna, taste. Krishna says in the Gita, I am the taste in water. So we can see how all these different things are manifest. But he's describing here, Prabhupada's describing here in this purport, how one becomes qualified to become a Devata. Oh, and as I was going to say, in the last four verses, there's 30, 31, 32, 33 in this section, we see how Maitreya Rishi is talking about how the Varnas, Brahmanas, Kshatriyas, Vaishyas and Sudras, they manifested from the universal form. And in the last verse, 33, it talks about Sudras. And Prabhupada makes a really interesting comment there, that he said it's better to be a Sudra who has this service attitude than a Brahmana who doesn't have a service attitude. Because service is essential. This service attitude is essential. And actually, as Prabhupada points out in many, many places, that this service attitude, this is the dharma of the living entity. This is actually the intrinsic nature of the living entity, is to serve. And if we don't have this service attitude, it's very difficult to make progress in devotional service. And actually, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, Srila Prabhupada and others have really emphasized how if one has the correct service attitude, then it's very easy to make progress in devotional service. So this is being emphasized by Srila Prabhupada here. And he's indicating how, or he's explaining here how the devatas have this appropriate service attitude. Through this attitude of service, they've developed piety. And this piety then enables them to have a higher position. And we see that, if you look at the devatas, their situation is mostly in the mode of goodness. Whereas here in this earthly realm, like there's 3 planetary systems, Bhubhava Swaha. So there's 3 planetary systems. This Svagaloka is predominantly goodness. This Bhuvaloka, you find, is predominantly passion. And then you go down to the lower planets, predominantly ignorance. Same with animal species, predominantly ignorance. So the more pious one becomes, then the more they go up in the planetary systems, the more they elevate themselves to this Svargaloka and beyond. And the more one becomes tamasic, as Krishna says, adogatanchi tamasaha. Those in the mode of ignorance, they're cast down into the lower species of life. And so to become a devata, one needs to be situated in the mode of goodness, which indicates pious activities. They have to become more pious in order to go up to the higher realms. And if they don't have the piety, then they can't go up to these higher realms. And this piety is developed through this devotional attitude, through devotional service, through doing acts in the mode of goodness. One develops this piety. And then also Prabhupada points out here about how their desire to lord it over material energy has vanished. Which is interesting because we see personalities like Indra, for instance. Obviously, his at least in certain circumstances, and maybe it's not necessarily always the same Indra, because we see in the Bhagavatam there's many different descriptions of devatas, Brahma and Indra and all these other devatas, but it's not always talking about the same personality. Because the Bhagavatam is not a chronological explanation of the Vedic texts. It's more focusing on particular themes in order to express particular points. And it may be, referencing histories from so many different kalpas. Not necessarily talking about, this present day and, this present sort of age that we're living in. This particular yuga cycle. It could be referring to any yuga cycle. So it's not necessarily a chronological explanation. But at least we see how there's a story that comes up, I think it's in the 31st chapter or the 30th chapter of this section of the Bhagavatam, where Indra becomes a pig. And he was forced to become a pig because he, from memory, the story is that he desired to enjoy with his guru's wife, and his guru said, "Well, you're no better than a hog because you should see the guru's wife as your mother." And so and we know that hogs don't have any discrimination with who they have sex with. So he wanted to have sex with the wife of his guru, so he had no discrimination. Therefore, he was cursed to become a hog. And it's just an interesting story. But we see, by and large, this story is pointing out obviously how he had these very, very strong material desires. And we see that anyone in this material world, as Krishna points out, he says, Abrahma bhuvana loka puna avatinu jamal tukuntaya puna jamana vidyate. The situation anywhere in the material world is the same. It doesn't matter if you're in the higher planets or the lower planets. They're places of repeated birth and death. And according to how one conducts themselves in these different situations, in these different planets or in these different bodies, then one will take on a particular body or particular form in the next life. And this is explained by Krishna in the beginning of the 8th chapter. Yam yam vapisman bhavam tyajet yanti karayaro tang tang evita kunte saratad bhava bhavata. Whatever, he says, yam yam, whatever state of being, yam yam vapi smaram bhavam, whatever nature you're achieving, whatever consciousness you achieve, whatever you remember at the point of death, instantly that's where you go in your next life. And this is also described later on in the third canto, where Kapila Deva is describing how Kamana Deva Netrena Jantu Deha Bhavatari Street. He's saying, according to one's karma and under the supervision of the divine, the living entity is forced. It's not like you choose. It's like, when you go into Coles, for instance, you want to buy a packet or something, and you've got so many varieties to choose from. You can choose the home brand, you can choose this brand, you can choose that brand. It's not like that. You can go and choose, but you're forced. You have to go into this body because of your karma, and under the supervision of the divine nature, all the divine nature's agencies. One takes on a particular species of life, according to your activities in your life, and according to the consciousness you achieve at the point of leaving this body. So, if one is cultivating this lower consciousness, like hogs, dogs, it talks in the Bhagavatam, the famous verse, there's hogs, dogs, camels, and asses. If we cultivate that consciousness, that's where we're going. It's all by choice. But some may be thinking at the moment of death, I'll choose. Just often you'll hear. I was listening to an interesting class the other day. There's a devotee in Melbourne. What's his name? It's a really saintly devotee, actually. Govardhandesh. He's a young brahmachari. He's a very, very saintly devotee. And he was giving a class, and he was talking about how people are thinking, though, when I get older, I'll practice bhakti. But no, it's not like that, because when you get older, or when you come to the point of death, what happens is all the desires you've cultivated throughout your life become very prominent. And Prabhupada makes this point. It's like when he was a child, they would hear Mahabharata and Ramayana. And the elders in their family would read those things to them when they went to bed. So at night time, what would they do? They'd dream about Krishna. So if we fill our day up with these activities of remembering Krishna, then at night time we can dream about Krishna. And also, if we fill our life up with these activities of Krishna consciousness, when we become older, when we come to the point of death, we'll automatically remember Krishna. But it's not something you can just, I'll just do my karmas now and, do whatever I have to do. Then when I get older, then I'll take up the process of bhakti. We don't see that happening. We don't see that happening. No, it's whatever you cultivate throughout life. And so we see here, Prabhupada's talking about these devatas, they're cultivating this attitude of surrender to the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Of course, we understand that their devotion is somewhat mixed. It's not, in most cases, in some cases it's a little bit different, but in most cases, it's not pure unalloyed bhakti. It's mixed with some kind of desire. That's why they're a controller in the material world. Anyone who has these material desires has to function, has to exist within the material world to play out these material desires, to try and fulfill your material desires. Because as long as you have some desire, you're going to remain some desire to enjoy or to control the material nature. Then you have to remain within this realm. But as soon as one can give up that desire completely, where it's completely destroyed, this desire is completely destroyed. There's no desire within the heart to manipulate or to control this material energy. Then one becomes eligible to return back to the spiritual realm. Doesn't necessarily mean you've got to go there, but you become eligible, because to return to the spiritual realm is dependent upon the mercy of Krishna. And that we'll see is discussed in later verses, how we're thoroughly dependent upon the mercy of the Lord to return to the spiritual realm. This is a really interesting section, because there's not many purports here. There's like 34 verses, I think, and there's 8 purports. And so we'll probably be covering this section quite quickly. I was kind of tossing up whether to there's another like 4 or 5 line purport on the next page, and I thought I'll read a few verses, but I thought no, this one's enough. But yeah, there's a lot of verses without purports, and basically what they're describing is how the sequence, how all these different senses manifested from the universal form. How I'll just go ahead one verse, and we'll see Agni, or heat, separated. Agni came out of the Lord's mouth, or separated from his mouth, and all the directions of material affairs entered in their respective position. By that energy, because it enters into the mouth. What does the mouth do? Primary thing the mouth does is it vibrates, it speaks. And then it says, from that energy, or by that energy, the living entity expresses himself in words. So it's really interesting, because we find that this, as I was saying, this goes up to verse 33, that this progression is also explained in the second chapter, in the second canto, in the 6th chapter. It goes into some detail about how these various senses manifest. But then also, again, in the 10th chapter, the 6th chapter is the Purusha Shukla confirmed, and I think the 10th chapter is answers by citing the Lord's version. So it's describing the same sequence, exactly the same sequence, and it's really, really interesting. I took some notes from earlier on. Let me just see if I can find them. So the 6th chapter of the second canto, from verses 1 to 16, same sequence is described. Not exactly the same order, but there's practically the same order. There's some slight variations in order. And then the 10th chapter, the same sort of thing, from verse 14 to 33, same idea. Yeah. And then the first thing that came to my mind was, well, why is this being repeated 3 times? In the space of like, we're only on the sixth chapter now, and then we had, from the 6th chapter to the second canto, there's 10 chapters in the second canto. So that's in the space of 11 chapters, we're hearing this same sequence repeated 3 times. So why is this happening in the Bhagavatam? What's going on here? Any thoughts?
Pretty important to learn.
It's obviously important, but what's important about it?
What is the sequence again that you're talking about?
It's explaining how from the Lord's body, or from the Lord's form, all the senses manifest, and the David is entered, and the David is the controlling David is of those senses. They enter into the David, and then this gives us the ability to function. So I was reflecting on this, and what's the importance of this? Yeah, that's a very good point. Nothing separate from Krishna. But I was thinking this verse, Aham savasya prabhu mata sarvam prabhatate iti matma bhajante mam buddha bhavasman buddha. That Krishna explains that I am the source of all material and spiritual worlds. Everything emanates from me. And the wise who perfectly know this engage in my devotional service and worship me with all their hearts. Now, this is one of the chapter slokas of the Bhagavad Gita. So it's a very, very important verse, and it's a very important theme, or very important principle that's being explained here. How everything comes from Krishna. And that's what we're being told here. Everything comes, every ability you have. Like sometimes, I remember one time I was in a hospital, and I was having what they call a stress test done, like on my heart, and these doctors, they always like to get you fearful that if you don't do their test, and if you don't do whatever it is they're going to say, you might die. And I'm thinking, I'm going to die anyhow. There's nothing I can do about that. It's going to happen to all of us. So you may as well just get on with becoming Krishna conscious and just live your life the best way you can. Anyhow, so what they was doing is like they're pushing you to breathe harder and harder and harder, and then at the end of it, the nurse says, "Just see what I made you do." And I think, "You didn't make me do anything. I was, the body was doing it." But the tendency of the living entity is to think themselves the controller, and then they want to claim victory for that. They have some achievement. They might win a tennis match or put up a house or a building or something like that, and they want to be glorified for it because they think they're the doer. But actually, there's Buddha Bhava Samanvita, that an intelligent person understands that everything comes from Krishna. Every capacity we have, the fact that we can see, it comes from Krishna. The fact that we can eat and taste food and digest, this comes from Krishna. Krishna says in the 10th chapter in the Gita, I'm the fire of digestion. He also says, I'm the ability man. He said, all these things are coming from Krishna. And so we see here what's will be described here in the subsequent verses, what's being described in the 6th chapter and the 10th chapter of the Bhagavatam, of the 2nd canto of the Bhagavatam, is no different from what Krishna is describing in the Bhagavad Gita. He's pointing out how everything comes from him. So if we understand that, everything comes from Krishna, then what should this do for us? What's the kind of response we need to have? As Krishna says, Buddha Bhava Samanvidha, then the wise person knows this worships me with all their hearts. And this is the point that I got from this, is the reason it's being repeated is to show us how dependent we are for our existence on the Supreme Person of God, that we cannot do anything without Krishna. We can't even breathe, we can't even think, we can't even remember anything, Krishna says, Mata smriti gyamana pavanamcha, that from me come knowledge, remembrance and forgetfulness. That everything comes from Krishna. The fact that you can remember something comes from Krishna. The fact that you know something comes from Krishna. Whether it's mundane knowledge or transcendental knowledge, it comes from Krishna. And that you forget something, that also comes from Krishna. So everything is coming from Krishna. So a wise person who understands this will worship Krishna with all their hearts. And this is another point, this class I was listening to 2 days ago, Gopa Vrindeshwaru, he was talking about this, how, in this material world we're wasting so much time on all sorts of things. He was talking about his study. I can't remember what the topic he studied, but he did 4 years study. And I was reflecting on this a while ago, actually. I think I was giving a class in Delhi or somewhere. That I remember studying mathematics. I did a math science degree, and I gave it up because I just couldn't see the point of it. Couldn't see where it was leading me. But I remember learning all these theories and Pauli's uncertainty principle and Avogadro constants and all this kind of quadratic equations and this thing and that thing. And since leaving school or university, I've never applied one of these things anywhere, except in a Bhagavatam class where I talk about it. Because it's useless knowledge. Because how do you use it in your life? How you apply it? So in essence, we've wasted time. And if we reflect back in our lives, and I think this is very important for us to do as devotees of Krishna, is to reflect in our lives, how much time are we wasting in our lives every day? Because we have a very, very limited lifespan. It's like, if we're lucky, I'm in my mid-60s now, if I'm lucky, I might live to 70 or 75. So how much time do we have to focus on the activities of Krishna consciousness? And this really needs to be our focus, if you like. It's like, I only have a limited amount of time here in this material world. And what is the best use of that time? The best use of that time is to develop my Krishna consciousness so that at the end of this life, I have some degree of certainty about my destination. Because if we waste time in this material world, if we waste time with unimportant things, there is no guarantee where we'll wind up. Because what are you going to remember at the moment of death? Because as I was saying, Krishna explains, whatever state of consciousness you achieve at the moment of death, that is where you go in your next life. So if you're watching some stupid video on YouTube or something like that, and you die, that's where you're going to go in your next life. So we have to be very, very careful and to the best of our capacity, use our time to be engaged in the activities of Krishna consciousness always. And this is the point that Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu mentions in the Shastastikam, is this line, Kirtanya Sada Hari, to be constantly engaged in chanting Krishna's holy name. And that doesn't necessarily mean japa, that can also mean reading Bhagavatam, it can mean presenting Krishna consciousness to others, but always be engaged in chanting the glories of Krishna. And this is going to guarantee our destination. Whereas if we're wasting our time in unimportant activities, then this is going to cause us to have an uncertain destination in our next life. And really, when we reflect on it, because I think we all have sufficient experience in this material world to realize that this is not a nice place. Okay, I mean, here we live in a very mode of goodness environment in New Govardhana, very, very beautiful. It's a nice temple environment, etc., like that. But still, we have adequate experience that this material world is not a nice place. Actually, Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, he compared it to a ditch into which people pass through. So who wants to, linger in such an environment? Who wants to, stay around in such an environment? Only a foolish person wants to do that. Once you have that knowledge of what this place is, it's called Martya Loka. It means it's a place of death. It's a place of suffering. We have this knowledge from Bhagavad Gita, from Srimad Bhagavatam, and the Vedic scriptures of the nature of this place. So if we have the knowledge of the nature of this place, is it intelligent to want to stay here? Is it intelligent to want to try to enjoy this place? Obviously not. Only a fool wants to stay or to live in a very, very difficult situation. So understanding the nature of this place and understanding that we can get out of this place, therefore we need to understand how to get out of this place, and that's through the process of bhakti. And by applying ourselves to the process of bhakti, then we can very easily extricate ourselves from this difficult situation. So, the notion of everything emanating from Krishna and how we're completely dependent upon Krishna, I think there's a really important message that's being discussed in these three sections that are here in the Bhagavatam. And not just intellectually, but actually demonstrate our dependence upon Krishna. Like even through attitudes of gratitude. Whatever's going on in our life, we offer our appreciation to Krishna. The fact that we have such a wonderful place to come and practice devotional service together. We have the ability to serve the deities. We have the ability we have the facility to hear and chant together, to offer our gratitude to Krishna. Whenever we read the Bhagavatam, in my study, I have like a few sort of things I like to reflect on with each verse. So first off, I look at, okay, what's the focus of learning? What's Krishna trying to tell me here? Or what's Prabhupada trying to tell me here? Then what do I have to be grateful for? What message am I getting from this that I have to be grateful for? And then, prayers, revealing my heart and things like that. And I think it's really important for us to express this our thanks to Krishna for everything we have. For the association of devotees, for the opportunity of devotional service, for the opportunity to chant the holy name, to really be thankful for everything Krishna is giving us. And it just helps us to become more aware of how we are dependent upon Krishna for everything we have. And just in closing, I just wanted to just reflect on what's being described in these upcoming verses. What happens is he manifests a sense, the Lord manifests a sense through the universal form. And we see how, in the previous chapter, how the whole section there where the Devatas, they were offering many, many prayers to Krishna, and in conclusion they say, look, we can't create anything without your potency, without you empowering us. And we see the same is there, in that pastime of the churning of the ocean of milk. If you look at that pastime, it's quite extraordinary how the whole thing manifested. And Krishna gave the Devatas instruction at the beginning of that. He said, look, whatever the Daityas want, just let them have it. And understand that I'll be here, I'll support you, I'll empower you to do this. And so what happened was Krishna, because they carried this great big mountain, and they were crushed by the mountain. So then Krishna entered into them and empowered them to carry the Mandara mountain. And then they put it in the ocean, in the milk ocean, and then it sunk. Because it was so big and so heavy, it sunk. So what happened? Lord Kalma manifested. and then he had the mountain on his back. And then the mountain was tottering, it was wobbling, so he manifested another form and he held the mountain steady. He actually manifested the mountain. Then Vasuki, and he says of serpents I am Vasuki. So he manifested again as Vasuki. And then he empowered both the Devatas and the Daityas to be able to churn the ocean. And then when this nectar of immortality was produced from the ocean, which is what they all wanted, was this nectar of immortality, the Daityas, they snatched it. And then what happened is Krishna manifested as Mohini Murti and bewildered the Daityas. And you know, they gave Mohini Murti the nectar, and he gave it to the demigods. Yeah? And the Devatas were successful in that endeavor. Why? Because they accepted that they were completely dependent upon Krishna. Yeah? And if we take this mood of being completely dependent upon Krishna, it doesn't matter what happens in our life. We understand that this is Krishna's arrangement, therefore we're peaceful. But if we're always trying to arrange the outcome or trying to manipulate the outcome in our favor, it's never going to work out exactly the way you thought it would. But if you allow Krishna to, you know, be the doer, which he is anyhow, it's not like, you know, your attitude is going to change the reality of him being the doer. But if you are willing to accept that Krishna is the doer in all things and just to let him manifest that, then you'll find the outcome will be beyond your wildest expectations. You'll become peaceful. You'll become happy. You'll become situated in devotional service, actually. Yeah, so the Lord manifests a sense. Then there's a controlling deity, a Devata manifests. And that controlling Devata, he's the one who controls, or controls the whole thing. Just like, you know, we have the power to speak. So there's a Devata called Vach. So she's the power of speech. Or like there's a demigod that controls the moving of your eyelid. You know, when you blink, this is all done by a demigod. And if that power is withdrawn, you can no longer do that. Just so you know, for any of us who are getting older, we notice that the hearing is going down, the taste is going down, the eyesight's going down. Without these, I can't see a thing. I mean, I can't. This is all just like fuzzy lines on the paper. You know, so we can see how gradually that ability is being withdrawn. And then so the Devata enters into that sense, and thus we're able to function in this world through this arrangement of Krishna. And there's a sequence. So, and as this is explained more in the 10th chapter of the second canto, is the jiva has a desire. Then the gross sense organ manifests in the Lord. This is the adibhuta. Then the subtle sense organ, the adhyatma, manifests in the Lord. Then the sense devata, the adidaiva, enters into that sense. And then the tanmatras, they manifest, especially in the five the senses. So it's quite an interesting section, and it's just helping us to see how everything is coming from Krishna. Ultimately, he is, as it says, that he's the source of all spiritual material worlds. Everything emanates from him. And you know, if we can just reflect on that, how this is all manifesting. Okay, it might be quite a fantastic explanation of how it's all manifesting, how he manifests this gigantic, you know, temporary material form, and everything manifests from that. It's like the form of the universe, actually, the Virat Rupa, but he manifests his form, and then everything comes from that, so that we can function in this world, so that we can experience, you know, the objects of the senses. He manifests all this. So I think the real thing for us to do is to appreciate how this is all ultimately coming from Krishna, and how the fact that we can function or do anything in this material world comes from Krishna, by him empowering us to be able to function in this material world. And with that contemplation, this will deepen our sense of dependence. This will deepen our sense of gratitude to the Supreme Person of Godhead. Okay, so I'll leave it there. Any questions or comments at all? Yes, Srimad Krishna Kirtan Prabhu.
the start of class, you were talking about how we choose destinations, so to speak, and expert by our action. It seems Krishna says in the Gita that we don't have much of a choice. At least the conditioned soul. I can understand liberated soul has transcendental knowledge, can make proper choices. But the average Joe below is under the influence. Krishna says in our practice that under the influence of three modes of natural nature, you think you're reacting back, you've been impelled. Arjuna asked the same question later on. He said, why do you want to impel back simply and unwillingly? And Krishna tells him that's not the influence of the passion. So how much choice they're living in his head once they're pretty much caught up in this material world. They seem to be forced to go with the flow.
Yeah, so in the beginning of I think it's the 3rd chapter, verse 5, Krishna mentions how the living entity is forced to act according to the modes of material nature. He cannot refrain from acting even for a moment. So this is more specifically referring to someone who's completely controlled by the modes of nature, someone who's not a devotee of Krishna. And it's a fact. We see, all you have to do is just, look around out, in the material world, and you see how people are forced. They have a particular nature, and it's like, when there's some stimulus, they'll respond in a predictable manner, completely predictable. But that's because they're choosing to take shelter of material nature. So you can choose, you take shelter of material nature, you take shelter of Krishna. That's the choice options you've got, nothing else. You take shelter of material nature, you're forced. No choice in the matter, you're forced. Kamana Deva Netrana Jantu Deva Pungsha is you're forced to enter into the womb. You've got no choice. And a particular type of womb based on your activities, based on your desires. But when one takes the process of bhakti, even in the beginning stages, the process of bhakti, one starts to change their choice. So you do have that choice. You have the choice to surrender Krishna or not surrender Krishna. That's basically it. And then when you choose to surrender to Krishna, this is actually the state of freedom. Because no longer are you dictated by the modes of material nature. No longer are you forced to enter into a womb, governed by the modes of nature. You're actually choosing to give up that cycle.
So it sounds like you need to get that information from somewhere. So unless you receive that information, you're going to know who. Unless you get the mercy of the devotee.
Yeah, but then devotees are very merciful. And you see, just like I was talking with Bharat Prabhu yesterday about what's going on here with this New Govardhana project. And there's so many ways that this knowledge is being given, just like we see with the yoga village down there. People come along and they think they're going to learn yoga. And then just due to the influence of the environment here, their lives change. And I meet people all over the world who know about Krishna Village. It's just extraordinary. Just in India, in London, in Europe, all over the world, I bump into people who've either been to Krishna Village. Like there was one girl here about 2 years ago from the UK, and she was going to the village. Now she's a devotee. I saw her at the temple in London with her parents. She was bringing her parents along to the temple. So you can see, this is the mercy of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, this is the mercy of Srila Prabhupada, how they've given us this Sankirtan mission, which as the Shastastra said, it's the prime benediction for humanity at large. This is the white lotus of the Sankirtan mission. It's the prime benediction for humanity at large because it spreads the rays of the benediction moon as the light of all transcendental knowledge, increases the ocean of transcendental bliss, and enables us to taste the nectar for which we're always anxious. That's this Sankirtan mission. It's designed to give everyone Krishna consciousness. That's its purpose, is to give the whole universe Krishna consciousness. So, devotees are very merciful. That's their nature, is they want to give everyone Krishna consciousness because they can see that this is actually, Rupa Goswami, in the 2nd chapter of the Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, he points out about this 6, devotional service gives you 6 benefits. The process of bhakti gives us 6 benefits. And even in the beginning stage of bhakti is relief from all the material distresses. So we're experiencing that. You know, if we look back to our life before we came to the process of bhakti, there's a lot of distress. But then when we come to bhakti, this distress diminishes and it gets to the point where it vanishes. You know, and even we find with this material things happen, we're not distressed by it. We say, oh, well, it's just the material nature, what can you do? You know? So the Sankirtan mission, as Lord Chaitanya says, is the prime benediction for humanity at large. It's the most auspicious thing in this universe. There's nothing, you know. And it's interesting, Prabhupada was talking about one time, he was talking about the importance of Sankirtan mission, and he's saying this Sankirtan mission is meant to deliver everyone in the world. He says, nay, not the world, the universe. The Prabhupada was saying it's meant to deliver everyone in the universe, and that's what this Sankirtan mission is all about, is to awaken people's dormant Krishna consciousness. And then I was listening to Bhujan Prabhu yesterday. He was is chapter 9 of the second canto, and he was reading from the first 3 verses, and he was reading Prabhupada's class. And in this class, Prabhupada, it was a really amazing class. Prabhupada was talking about how actually this like conditioning's material world is just a temporary covering, because actually the living entities are Krishna conscious. They're just covered over. So when we start to erode that covering, very quickly the jiva returns to this Krishna conscious. Why? Because that's what we are. We are Krishna conscious beings, but we're covered over right now. And so it's a very, very extraordinary class that Prabhu was reading from. So when people come into, you know, in Prabhupada saying, just scratch the surface, and it comes, you know, kararaya dai, as it says in Chaitanya Charitamrita. This love that just bursts out, it's awoken very, very quickly. Jai Shri Prabhupada ki, Samaveta Bhaktivinoda ki, Jai Nitai Gaur Premanandi.